Welcome to a series of interviews we are planning in near future. The platform Academic Direct is a way of speaking truth as we see it, as we feel it, and as we understand it. It's a channel that will try to bring back audience to focus on the real subjects that are threatening our near future. Today, we are hosting special guest from Switzerland, Philipp KRUSE. My name is Robert Grill. I'm active in searching, revealing truth, and disassembling deep agendas for last 3.5 years. Co-hosting with me is Tjaša Vuzem, founder of activist group CISP, a group of Slovenian lawyers, a rebel who devoted the last 3-4 years on international projects, activities that brought exact information also in Slovenia. Tjaša, this is not the first time we are guesting Philip. This is the third occasion. One of the last was with Vesna Kerstin Petric, WHO former executive board chair, and with Sylvia Berndt in March last year. But before we should start the interview, let me introduce our special guest, Philipp KRUSE. He is a member in many prominent groups that are fighting glass perimeter of freedoms attacked by vicious capital. Philipp KRUSE ran his own tax law practice in Zurich from 2012 to 2018. Today, he has the area of back taxes and tax penalties in office of Canton of Lucerne. Philip studied at University of Bern, Heidelberg, Exeter in United Kingdom, has practiced in 3 commercial law firms in Zurich since 1998. He worked in Zurich Cantonal Tax Office from 2003 to 2007 and has since specialized in the area of tax and duty law. Since the beginning of the Corona scam, he has been extremely and very active in various international lawyers and activist groups. He has given lectures on the WHO issues and members of parliament in the European Parliament with Dr. Sylvia Berndt, an Austrian lawyer. And in the past year, he has given speeches and interviews in various conferences, as well as in some European parliaments. In Switzerland, he's representing a group of pilots and a high-profile class action. I think shortly he will file a lawsuit against Swissmedic, which is equivalent to our Slovenian NIEZ, state entity which regulates the national health. Philip, welcome to our platform. Welcome.
Thank you, Robert, for the invitation. It's an honor to be here with you, and also thank you to Tjaša.
Tjaša, before you continue with question, can you in short words explain the results of meeting that was held last year with representatives of the WHO? Microphone, please, Tjaša.
Yeah. Yes, of course. In fact, it was the second meeting with Dr. Vesna Kerstin Petric. The first one was in August 22, and it's a very long process and took several months just to get an appointment. I had to intervene afterwards a lot to get the minutes of the meeting. So the questions we asked Dr. Petric were from a legal point of view, mostly, which she was not able to answer. So she forwarded them to the WHO legal department. At least she told us so. We are still waiting for the answers. But Dr. Sylvia Berndt, you mentioned before, she's an Austrian lawyer, and she also used to work at the World Health Organization in the IHR department. She is in written contact with Dr. Petric. So no answers. at the moment, no answers from them. And in my opinion, the WHO is a large, big organization, ossified, I would say, with a little room for civil society, unfortunately.
I hope we will get questions at least one day. Yeah. So, because you're deeply involved in the WHO subject, would you shoot the questions, please?
Yeah, of course. Thank you, Philipp, for being here today. I very appreciate your work and efforts and all your support you are providing us with. So shall we begin, Philipp, with the WHO issues?
Yes, please. And I might just briefly correct a sentence in the introduction. It is important to note that I was heading the Office of Tax Penalties in the Canton of Lucerne 2019-2020, but that terminated. I am a free lawyer, an independent lawyer with my independent law firm in Zurich, Switzerland. I just wanted to correct that part because that is very important, that I'm not acting in any official capacity, but as an independent lawyer.
Thank you. Thank you. Now, we are talking today about the WHO's intentions. We have two very important legal documents we will be talking about. The first one is the so-called International Health Regulations, and the second one, pandemic treaty or accord or CA plus whatever. I would like to know if you could give us a very short explanation what the IHR document is and why are the amendments of this document needed, and why the second one, the second legal document, the so-called pandemic treaty, is being introduced. What is the purpose? Yeah, thank you.
Yes, absolutely. So in order to have the full picture, we need to start during the pandemics, during the year 2020-21, within WHO, there was a growing sense that WHO would need to be given more and additional competences because of the notion they considered themselves underprepared, and they called for an extraordinary World Health Assembly in December 2021 to actually bring this to the public attention. The logic, the world was underprepared, it was heavily struck by COVID-19, and the biggest problem looking back was that not all countries received the COVID-19 vaccines as they needed. That is sort of what WHO made out of this COVID-19 crisis. And out of that logic grew the decision to strengthen the capacity to actually prevent future pandemics from happening and to strengthen WHO in its responses. And then the question was, how do we do it? And they created two working groups. The first working group was basing their work on the already existing, as you mentioned correctly, the international health regulations. They do exist since the 60s. They were amended into their today's format in 2005 and were adopted. It came into force into most countries in the year 2007. And this is actually the basis for the COVID-19 pandemic management of what we have seen in the past. Now, what they did was, let's use these international health regulations and let's try to insert all the changes that we think are necessary for having a better pandemic management, to strengthen WHO. Now, you need to understand that international health regulations, this is a legal instrument with limited possibilities. For the experts or the lawyers here, go into Article 21 of the World Health Organization's Constitution, and there you will find a list of those topics that are allowed to be governed or that are allowed to be covered by international health regulations, sort of technical topics. So it is obvious if you really want to give WHO more powers, more constitutional powers, you will also need to have a new independent pandemic agreement where you can insert everything that you cannot put into the international health regulations. So that was the reason for opening up 2 working groups with 2 different types of international agreements. You must know that also the international health regulations technically are an international agreement. And so here we are. They are in the midst of the process of drafting, of negotiating, and the plan is for WHO to have next May, this coming May of this year, a vote of the finalized amended international health regulations and also on the new pandemic treaty.
So two-thirds of vote are needed, are required, as far as
Yes.
I understood.
This is correct. It is important to know that for a new treaty to come into force for the WHO members, there is a 2/3 quorum needed at the World Health Assembly. So 2/3 out of these 194 WHO member states. This is quite a high quorum, because if you compare that to the international health regulations, any amendments technically will be accepted on the basis of just a simple majority. 51% will be sufficient. That's quite a lower threshold. And there's also another difference between these 2 different instruments, legal instruments, and this is how they will come into force. But I guess we will come to that later, right?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
So the declaration of the so-called fake public health emergency is already defined in the current international health regulations, right?
Absolutely. This is Article 12. It was the basis for the Director General, Tedros, to declare a public health emergency of international concern end of January 2020. And this basis now shall be far extended. The reasons for declaring and justifying a pandemic shall be widely extended, ultimately without any standards. We can come to the details, but I just throw into our discussion the word One Health. We should consider this term separately. This term of One Health will ultimately give World Health Organization, Tedros, the power to declare a public health emergency of international concern, literally out of thin air for any given reason. This is one of the highest concern we have. And you ask also about the difference between the new pandemic treaty and the international health regulations.
Yeah.
Yes. So why do we need a separate agreement? The separate agreement is actually, you need to understand that the international health regulations are focused and centered all around the notion of public health emergency of international concern. So it governs the duties of the member states and also the powers of the WHO under such a fake, as you referred correctly, abbreviation, public health emergency of international concern being fake. Now, but what do we do in the periods before we have a pandemic? And there is where the pandemic treaty comes into place. So it's related to, it refers to all pandemic related matters not only during an actual pandemic, but also before, which is the period of pandemic prevention and pandemic preparedness. So it imposes on member states the duty to do supervision on all kinds of genomes, on diseases, on all kinds of potential sources for a threat to health in the widest possible sense, whereas the international health regulations, they are mainly actually focused on what are the duties of the involved parties during a pandemic.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Philip. Now, the next question is because of the confusion, and misinformation among the public. What is the procedure? We are approaching the end of it, but anyway, what is the procedure and the timeline for adoption of these two documents, legal documents? So we know now WHA is approaching, and it will be a very important assembly.
Absolutely. I forgot to ask you whether it would be possible to share the screen, because then I could show you a slide that would make it easier for everybody to understand. Is it possible to share the screen?
I don't know.
Yes.
Okay, it's good. So I will here. Do you see the slide? This two projects in parallel?
Yeah.
Excellent.
We do.
So I mentioned there are two working groups, one focusing on the amendment of the already existing international health regulations, IHR amendments, that's the top line, and the lower line is the working group that works on the new pandemic treaty. And so what is the timeline here? Looking at the World Health Assembly this coming May, as I mentioned already, simple majority will be sufficient for the adoption, the WHO internal adoption, whereas for the treaty, 2/3 majority. But now it is really interesting when it's with respect to coming into force, because the international health regulations, they are considered just technical, medical and pandemic regulations. They will come into force automatically 12 months after the 1st of June 2024, unless a government for a country, a specific, for any given country, one government declares a rejection, explicitly rejection to the Director General. So if this rejection does not happen, that means that on 1st of June 2025, these amendments will come into force for that country that did not reject. That is the dangerous part here, whereas for the treaty, the WHO constitution requires that a domestic process of ratification according to your own constitution will be held, will be completed. So whatever you have in your constitution with respect to ratification, in some countries there are even public votes to be held or referendums. This will apply here, and that means we have a certain element or guarantee of a democratic public debate when it comes to the treaty. But when it comes to the international health regulations, there will be no public debate unless we or you force our government to discuss these amendments. And as I will show, these amendments will change our constitutions, and these amendments will also, in fact, modify the powers of WHO on their own constitution. So we have these international health regulations are far more. The amendments will be far more than just being technical amendments. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, regarding these amendments and regarding the sovereignty, seizing the sovereignty, or on the 30th of October, a document of this group, international intergovernmental negotiating body, was issued, including Tedros' statement, namely that no country will cede sovereignty, any sovereignty, to the WHO. I know it has been spread all over the world by the media that this is not true. This is a false claim, as well as by our governments. Also, I think that at our meeting, Dr. Petric, she also told us about that no sovereignty will be seized. Do you agree? Is it a false claim?
This is one of the main battlegrounds we have here, where we have an absolute clear difference between the official position of WHO and the official position of our governments on the one side, and what we see as lawyers and as activists in these agreements. Well, where does this come from? This notion of sovereignty? We must know that in the international treaties world, sovereignty has a very formalistic notion, in the sense of as long as a country can make its own decisions without, I exaggerate, without having another country invading its borders and forcing this country to sign any agreement, then this is still considered sovereignty. So from a formalistic point of view, it would be truly an act of sovereignty for Slovenia, for also Switzerland, for every country to sign these agreements and to live with the consequences. This is actually not a wrong assessment, but it is misleading. Why is it misleading? Because if we go into the details of these amendments, we find provisions that clearly state that the member states shall undertake to follow WHO's recommendations. They shall undertake to follow. This is a legally binding promise. So coming back to the notion of sovereignty, of course, a country would then still be able to say, oh, we are sovereign, we will not follow recommendations of WHO, but this would mean they would be in breach of an international agreement. And being in breach of these amendments of the international health regulations will have consequences. We can see the consequences in the amendments themselves. There will be an implementation committee, which will carefully supervise the implementation of these amendments. There will be then a compliance committee that will carefully supervise every country whether it is compliant or not. And then there will be the World Health Assembly, to which any potential breach of the duties under international health regulations will be reported. And then the International Health Assembly can vote on sanctions. And these sanctions can be significant. And then we shall not forget there are other players as well, the European Community, they can impose sanctions. We have the World Health Bank, which is heavily involved into the financing of WHO. They can also tighten the terms for national funding, for credits. So yes, you can say the country is still sovereign, but the price for sovereignty will be put to a maximum that sovereignty cannot be truly exercised. So therefore, it is misleading to say sovereignty is actually not touched. Absolutely misleading.
Thank you. Now, on our website, Ministry of Health, this section WHO, we do have it. it stated that the declaration of public health emergency of international concern is already defined in current international health regulations, which clearly state that the Director General, Tedros in this case, has the possibility to declare a public health emergency if the adopted criteria are met. In fact, it's true. Tedros, as you know, as we all know, he declared a public health outbreak of, emergency in response to a monkeypox outbreak. Although his advisory board, with Mike Ryan, I think, they rejected it. So what is to be now changed if a new agreement or a new international health regulations are mandated?
Yes, here the best is if we go directly into these changes, and I may share again my screen. So you should be able now to see Article 12, the amendments to this Article 12. And just already in the headline, you see here public health emergency of regional concern or intermediate concern. That means already as a matter of precaution, terrorists could say, we think that there might be a future threat, so I declare an intermediate health alert, or I declare it just for Europe. That lowers, of course, the threshold for calling out a public health emergency of international concern. You can see abbreviation is fake. Now, it can just be done in the future by one single person, by the Director General. No need anymore to demand the countries, which so far was necessary. Then I continue. The reasons, there is a decision tree in Annex number 2 related to Article 12. And here, may I draw your attention on the middle, human influenza caused by a new subtype. That shall truly be a sufficient justification for declaring a new pandemic. Human influenza caused by a new subtype. We know, everybody knows, probably since the Romans, we have every winter a human influenza caused by a new subtype. And then this lower part here, clusters of other severe infections in which human-to-human transmission cannot be ruled out. So this is already very far-reaching in itself. But this is not enough. As I mentioned already, this notion of One Health, it is somehow hidden in the international health regulations, but it is very clear in the new pandemic treaty. And in the new pandemic treaty, you will find this in the definition part. I just go down the use of terms, Article 1, and there, here, in Article 1 of the new pandemic treaty, use of terms, and actually this is so important that I share the screen and put it on Article 1. So, can you see the screen of Article 1? Yeah. Excellent. So here you see One Health approach. And this should actually frighten everybody who has so far nothing heard about this whole process. One Health approach means an integrated, unifying approach that aims to sustainably balance and optimize the health of people, animals, and ecosystems. And when you go a bit further down, it says this approach mobilizes multiple sectors, disciplines, and communities at varying levels of society to work together, and so on, to health of ecosystems while addressing the collective need for clean water, energy, and air, and safe and nutritious food, and so on, taking action on climate change. Now, all of this is covered under the notion of One Health approach, which is not a new notion. It is being discussed for more than 10 years, probably 15 years, seemingly with an academic scientific approach and seemingly with a very good reason, but it opens the door to literally declare fake for any possible given reason. So we have now, with this One Health approach, with this decision tree of human influenza caused by a new subtype, and transmission cannot be ruled out, we have such a wide discretion of reasons that we must come to the conclusion it is based on total arbitrariness, whether the God in Geneva, Director General, finds it suitable today to declare a public health emergency of international concern. And we have had already 3 years fake. The duration of COVID-19 fake was 3 years, more than 3 years. Now we are looking at having more fakes, and fakes for lesser good reason.
So Tedros, or Director General, having such competence, the next question would be which authority controls him, or the decision making of Director General? Because we are talking now how one man can control the lives and livelihoods of billions of people. He can decide, regardless of the opinion of his advisors, whether to start a pandemic or when, if at all, to finish it, and everything in between, from lockdowns, school closures, vaccinating, testing, etc. So, and if we link this, that he has total immunity, then he's not responsible for anything. And so we are talking, I think, of one man's supremacy, of one man's total power over almost all of humanity. Could we say we are talking about totalitarianism?
This is absolutely an example of totalitarianism, because there is no mechanism of checks and balances which balances out this power. And of course, a formalistic response would say, well, there is an authority controlling the decision making, and this is the World Health Assembly. And countries come together usually once per year. And if the Director General would, in theory, get total out of control, then still there would be the possibility to call him before this World Health Assembly. This is a formalistic approach. We have seen no such an attempt in the past 3.5 years. Not one single country has actually submitted a request to reconsider this method of PCR-based pandemic testing. Not one single country I have noticed has requested to reconsider the mRNA-based vaccines. So I don't see an effective process of checks and balances associated with the World Health Assembly. So, being citizens and ultimately paying the bill, we have to look for effective guarantees. Who is actually protecting our rights? Who is protecting the sovereignty of our country effectively? And if there's only a theoretical body, totally passive, not acting, then this is not a sufficient system of checks and balances. Historically, we could say, yes, WHO had only an advisory role. Their role, when the World Health Constitution was drafted in 1945 to 48, and it was adopted in 48, was just to be a mere advisor. So for an advisory role, you don't need effective control, you don't need checks and balances. But now, with giving WHO more effective powers and authority to make these so important decisions for the entire world, how to test and how actually to respond to all these pandemics, what substance to take, only mRNA shall be allowed, then we definitely need a very powerful controlling authority and a mechanism that would allow the countries and also the individuals to say, no, stop, we don't have a pandemic, or stop, these substances are purely experimental and they are dangerous and they shall never enter into the public sphere. We don't take it. So, yeah.
Thank you. So there is no authority.
No authority, yeah.
No authority. Now I think we are coming to the root of all evil. And this is the so-called private-public partnerships. Yeah, we know that WHO gets its funding from two sources. The first one is are the assessed contributions paid by the countries. These are membership fees. And the second one are voluntary contributions paid by the countries as well, by member states, and also by other organizations. The problem is they are paid mostly, and this is like more than 80% by the so-called NGOs, shareholders, and also, of course, by pharmaceutical companies, because in the recent decades, as we know, the WHO has been taken over by big pharma. So this neoliberal ideology of private-public partnerships, is it a danger to the politics of WHO? As I said, 80% of more than 80% of WHO's funding comes from these organizations. So I think it's crystal clear who is running the show. What do you think?
Well, absolutely. I just share the screen again. This is totally correct what you said with respect to the payments, the assessed contributions or ordinary contributions of the 194 member states. This is from the WHO's homepage itself. They say it is so deplorable that in our ordinary budget, less than 20% comes from the ordinary or assessed contributions, and that we need more than 80% from the voluntary contributions. And already here, of course, this is an economic law. Who pays the piper commands the tune, or as saying in English, I mean, who actually pays the bill is in command of the service. So this is actually here the topic. And if we then go deeper into WHO's own homepage, we see it in more detail. Yes, okay. So here the voluntary contributions specified with a specific earmarked purpose that serves the private-public partner. And this is more than 70.3%. And then the voluntary contributions that still have a thematic earmarking, like it shall be used for COVID-19 vaccines. This is still 6.3. So taking that together, it is more than 76% right now. This is from the homepage. You find here the link below. And what does it mean? I mean, who are these people? That you asked the right question. And again, from the homepage of WHO, voluntary contributions specified, so with a very precise purpose. Number one, Germany, where we have always to ask the question, how sovereign is Germany when spending all of that money? Is that truly in the interest of the people, or is it more in the interest of their pharma? And then we have here Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, number 2. And here in position number 4, Gavi Alliance, which is significantly governed by Bill and Melinda Gates. They injected their first huge part of the founding finances into a Gavi alliance to make it actually to found it, and still they have reserved a huge influence on Gavi. So taking these two together, we come to over $1 billion US. Milliarden is German, so billion US dollar for a 2 years term. So that's number one. That's taking that together. That's number one, and that leads us then to the question: okay, who is this Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation? How actually benevolent are they? We know all that Bill Gates in 2019, at the occasion of the World Economic Forum, he told the public that it is a great return on investment, 20 to 1, his investment into vaccines. And by the way, it's tax-free. This is a tax-free profit. He mentioned that in this interview. It is still available to everybody. I mean, the question is, how philanthropic is Bill and Melinda Gates? He is invested also was invested in BioNTech. At the moment, and this is highly interesting, he started his investment at a time where BioNTech was sort of not yet visible to the investor for free, at the market share of 18.10 US dollar, and he sold it then at a price of plus minus 300. So that's pandemic. This is what we call pandemic profiteering, because if you invest at that time and then you appear in the biggest news channels of Germany and then BBC to promote your vaccine in April, telling the people, unless everybody is vaccinated, nobody will be safe. So this is actually what we have to see as facts when talking about who is about to finance and who is behind and who controls the WHO. He is not the only one, of course, but he seems to be a driver, a major driver, and the most important one. And he is self-interested. He has pandemic interest. He is a profiteer. He has benefited from the pandemic hugely. So this is reality. He makes money out of pandemics.
So thank you. Do you see any solution to this? I mean, can the WHO be repaired, so to say?
Well, not with the current people, of course. The original idea was good. Let's have a joint platform of expertise where countries can benefit from the expertise of many different international experts. And maybe also this platform helps as a market to make it easier to facilitate for countries to get not only information, but also those, let's say, diagnostic tools that they find fit in their free decision-making process. Yes, this all could make sense. But right now, we have an investors-driven power structure that defines above our heads when do we have pandemics, and we have not yet spoken about their information control, the supremacy on information, which seems to be so important to them that we find it in both legal instruments, in the new pandemic treaty, Article 18, and then also in the amendments. We find it also in the discussions of United Nations, very prominently in several documents. So this seems to be a matter of high concern, to be in control of the public opinion, in control of the public information. As we are all lawyers, we all know that without an informed consent, no decision is legally binding. And in particular, not when it comes to experiments. When it comes to experimental substances, we must all remind ourselves there's an international convention on the political and civil rights concluded under the title of United Nations, Article 7. It explicitly prohibits any kind of experimental treatment without a full informed consent. And this is something that is absolutely violated with a system where we would allow WHO to be in control of the information, not telling us how experimental these substances are, how dangerous, all of these risks. They were never allowed to enter the public sphere, and still today we find on the homepage of WHO the appraisal of these mRNA-based vaccines. There's tons of evidence that they still today promote these vaccines. So they are the main promoters of their sponsors' products.
Like CP with its 100-day vaccine program, funded by, Norwegian government, and also Bill and Melinda Gates. And you mentioned also World Bank.
Yes, absolutely.
It's also there. Yeah.
Yes, of course, they are more than just WHO and Gavi. There's CEPI. There are other organizations working closely together towards this main goal with an enormous economic power behind. Yeah.
So going back to this PPP, 3Ps, disclosure of contracts. I think this is also one or the biggest problem. These contracts with public, private, with these corporate entities, they are kept confidential upon the will, of course, of a donor. But it is not a way to guarantee a non-fraud policy. I think we spoke this with Dr. Petric. We know that 40 contracts with Facebook, WhatsApp, and other technological companies are not disclosed, and the terms of these contracts have not been cleared with the executive board and not with the World Health Assembly's approval, because of the donors, because the donors reject this. So, how do you comment this? Is it okay?
It is absolutely not okay. Even if we had not Article 737 in the WHO Constitution, just looking at the purpose of the WHO, that WHO shall do its best, summarize Article 1 of the Constitution, actually to promote and to help countries to safeguard public health of their people. There is Article 37 of the World Health Organization's Constitution, and it is very clear in this respect. It says in the performance of their duties of the Director General and the staff shall not seek or receive instructions from any government or from any authority external to the organization, and they shall refrain from any action which might reflect on their position as international officers. Each member of the organization on its part undertakes to respect the exclusively international character of the Director General and the staff, and not to seek to influence them. So they must be independent from the influence of private partners, of sponsors. And in order to prove that they are independent, they must disclose the private-public partnership agreements. Otherwise, it is not transparent. It's not possible, actually, to make sure that this principle that I just quoted from Article 37, that this is safeguarded.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. That's a very strong point. Of course, it's a clear additional indication that they follow instruction from their sponsoring partners.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Now, talking about these two instruments, when they are adopted, could you perhaps sum up the most striking points possibly having fatal consequences on our lives.
Absolutely. So this is probably known by now. I just provide you with an overview on my most important critics. Let's put it this way. Let's start from a different perspective for now. And I just open again the screen. Look, we could say there are constitutive core elements of every constitution, whether it is Slovenia, Switzerland, United States, that are usually considered by every national constitutional court as absolutely indispensable for a democracy to survive, right? And I start here with point number 2, the democratic principle, self-determination of the people. Whatever we conclude with WHO, this shall never be in danger. Then also system of checks and balances shall never put into question, because we must always be in the position to correct abuse of power. Then, as I mentioned, a rule of law and right of free information, free speech. Now, and then ultimately, of course, effective protection of human rights. If you take away such an effective mechanism, then you eliminate one of the core elements of an true democratic system. Now, to your question coming back, I just show you the most critical points here. We can see, looking into international health regulations, and afterwards I will course also summarize most critical points from the pandemic treaty. So number 1, we mentioned that already. We have seen that looking at Article 12, looking at the One Health concept, this is a concept of self-authorization, self-empowerment of WHO by mere declaration. It is just sufficient to call a press conference and say, now we have another fake, we have another pandemic. It will be as easy as that, and no contradiction possible. And coming with that, all the rest of number 2, number 3, number 4, as soon as there's an official declaration of a fake pending, then WHO recommendations will become legally binding. And legally binding, that's another very crucial point, also point of debate. The public will say no, they are, the official side will say it's not legally binding. Please then explain to me, why do we have why do we have, I briefly go into here, Article 13a. This is a proposal. Why do countries shall undertake to follow WHO's recommendations in the international public health response? Or another article, 42, why do we have that health measures shall be initiated and completed without delay by all parties? Talking here about temporary recommendations and permanent recommendations. And as I said, of course, they have still the sovereignty not to follow, but this would be then an example of a breach of an international contract, which then would be subject to the implementation committees, supervisory actions, compliance committee, and ultimately health assembly. So number 2, the big point is that WHO will have the directive power, the power to issue directives and to govern directly into our lives, whether it is lockdowns, the duty to wear masks, then to promote a digital electronic passport as a precondition for traveling, or as a precondition for going to work, or for participating in public life. And most significantly, WHO will be the sole power on the globe to define which substance will be considered to be sufficient to make people have the status they are vaccinated, they are healthy. they are the only ones. There will be no second opinion be allowed. And can we imagine a time in history where no second opinion was allowed? And here we have then point number 3, excuse me. Here we go, point number 3, information controlled censorship, already mentioned, no checks and balances. So all of that are elements of totalitarianism. These are elements of we never have in democracy, in a democratic structure, any kind of this, and we would not be in a state of alarm if we had not seen the past of having more than 3 years public health emergency of international concern for COVID. It was extended and extended again for having it from end of January 2020 to 3rd of May 2023, just last year. So all of that will be a permanent status without any accountability, with full immunity, with full tax exemption. And we don't then even have to ask the question, what about the fundamental rights? What about human dignity? If all the judges hear all the time the same manipulated information about how dangerous the virus is, and that the sole solution will be this vaccination, then they cannot effectively protect fundamental rights. So that was with respect to international health regulations, very briefly. And then, as we don't have so much time, of course, I just throw in a couple of notions with respect to the new pandemic treaty. Please, if you have time, go into Article 17, whole of government and whole of society approach at the national level. These are additional effective proof of a very totalitarian approach. That means that all branches of the government, all elements of the society shall execute any kind of recommendations, which we have seen will become orders just because WHO has issued them. So if there's just the stamp or the logo of WHO on any given paper, it will have to be executed down to the very local community level. Then I mentioned this approach of One Health. And then there's another very, very crucial part, equity. They have in mind that equity is more important than human rights. What do they mean? With equity, they mean the fairness in distributing vaccines. They say the biggest problem in the past was that not all countries got their vaccine mRNA-based sufficiently quickly. So we have to make sure for the future they will be equally treated. And this is where the term equity comes from. And on this title, you will find that in Article 11 and ongoing, WHO intends to establish a system of transfer of technology, transfer of know-how, where those countries who have the know-how, who have the technology to produce mRNA-based vaccines, shall transfer it to the other countries. But also they have already established in Africa a production hub for a huge mass-scale production of mRNA-based vaccines. Then the notion of regulatory strengthening, Article 14, to speed up the process of national authorization of mRNA-based or other new experimental vaccines. They said that was a process that took still too long, far too long. This process of 6 months, we can reduce it to 6 weeks or to 10 weeks. So this is meant by regulatory strengthening. And of course, WHO wants to become the global authority to actually define what kind of substances shall be accepted. Then we will have a new power, the Conference of the Parties. And that's my last point of many points that should be mentioned. And please, it's anything from being complete. But there will be also a new body created according to the latest version of the pandemic treaty dating from 30th of October 2023, Conference of the Parties. And this Conference of the Parties shall be given the power to define amendments and annexes to the new pandemic treaty. So it will become an evolving instrument, an evolving treaty, which will allow the conference of the parties, which is ultimately the selection of the member states, to actually just conclude on new amendments without having the vote of the people, without having the parliaments, the national parliaments involved. So these are just some of the most concerning changes that deviate so far from any of our principles of free information, principles of democracy, the basic principles of also checks and balances, the principle of legality. We need to have standards, standards that are transparent and controllable. And yes, so if we have such a huge number of constitutional principles being breached and our own self-determination will diminish to zero, then we must conclude that all of these changes, they all amount to a factual change of our own national constitution. Because our national capacity, our capacity to defend our human rights, to defend our self-determination, to have free speech, to have a law-based politics, this capacity will be diminished to almost zero. So we must treat also these changes as if it were changes to our national constitutions. And the same goes also with respect to the WHO constitution itself. So far, the WHO has no capacity other than to just provide advice. It has just advisory capacity. There is nothing to be found in the WHO constitution that would grant WHO the authority to make decisions over the heads of their member states. So we have in the same time also a factual change of the WHO's constitution itself. That means at least 6 months in advance, member states should be informed. Hello, member states, we want to change our constitution. We are now far less than 6 months in advance. So that's number one. And 2/3 again for a quorum for the adaptation of changes. So all of that raises a lot of legal technical questions. And please, my apologies to the spectators, to the listeners, that this is a bit complicated. But on the other side, this allows us to have such a huge number of arguments that are objectively seen, usually must be seen as counter-arguments against these two legal instruments, and that must conclude us to clearly say no to these changes, to these new treaties.
Thank you, Philipp. And we have to mention also special funding, huh?
Yes, this is right. WHO, yes, thank you. Under this treaty, WHO reserves its right to assign additional funding duties to the countries and saying, oh, we find we are still underfunded for the project of new mRNA-based vaccines. So let's take the richer countries and make them pay more payments than just the assessed contributions. Yes, absolutely. It shall be put into the hands and discretion of WHO to define additional fundings. Yeah.
So
I have some comment in between. I think WHO is not trying to impose power just on health regulation. They are widening the concept also to climate change, CO2 problems, production of food. That means if they gain all this power, they will regulate practically every aspect of our lives, not just health.
This is correct. Maybe I was not clear enough, but that's exactly what I wanted to say. This is the One Health approach. Absolutely correct. Yes, Robert, thank you.
That means that we are actually talking about establishing a one-world government in the world.
We are on the fast track towards this this fact, and I usually don't. I try to avoid terms that we could then be called by the name of conspiracy theorist. But what we can see here is the fast track toward a one world government. Yes, absolutely. Nothing less than that.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm. Okay. You know, I would like to know, we have a Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the highest codification of human rights and freedoms. And doesn't all these articles you talked about, which are to be changed, do they clash directly with the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which was adopted by the United Nations? And WHO is only an agency of the United Nations.
Thank you for the question. Absolutely. Tiasha, I briefly go into the respective slide here. So you mentioned Universal Declaration of Human Rights, and literally almost every of these basic human rights here is, of course, is violated. So what we see here, all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. So it's a breach of dignity, actually, if we tell all human beings, you must now be vaccinated and you must take this substance, even if you do it with nicer words than I just did it. But we have very strong, one of the strongest actually, is what I mentioned before, this International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights of United Nations, Article 7. It is sort of the equivalent to the Nuremberg Code. It's not the Nuremberg Code, but it's very equivalent. What does it say? That's the anti-torture article. And it says in second sentence, in particular, no one shall be subjected to medical or scientific experimentation without his or her voluntary consent. What does it mean? Voluntary consent means we must be given free choice, no pressure whatsoever, no even social pressure. And number two, full information on the experimental character of these substances, in the sense of we don't know anything about safety. Actually, we have some information that it is not safe, blah, blah, blah. So this is also part of United Nations, a long list of here, you see it also, it's Article 5 within Universal Declaration. No one shall be subject to torture or to cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment. And this is my main assertion against WHO, my main assertion also as a lawyer who has submitted a criminal complaint against Swissmedic. It is an example of cruel, inhuman and degrading treatment of people if we don't give them free choice and full information. This is a backdrop into medieval times. We shall never allow that. And as this article here, we go back, even this provision applies even in time of public emergency, which threatens the life of the nation and is officially proclaimed. So we cannot use this excuse, oh, this is just an emergency authorization, so thereby we can allow exceptions from this. No, there's no exception to that whatsoever. So yes, the list, of course, is much longer of all these fundamental rights, Tiasha, that is violated, but here are just the most important ones. Yeah.
Thank you. So you have had also with Dr. Sylvia Behrendt, I mentioned before, the Austrian lawyer, many lectures. Also, you were invited by, I think, Christine from Germany, the MEP, member of European Parliament, Anderson. And I would like to know what were the responses of the members of Parliament. You know, I think only around seven members of European public appear in public. Parliament, sorry, appear in public, and not more. This number is not growing, and I'm a little bit alarmed by this fact.
Well, it takes some time. The number is growing. If you look at the letter that was drafted and sent by 12 MEPs end of November directly to Tedros from a team around Rob Rose, and signed obviously by all of these 7 members of the European Parliament, but in altogether 12. It is like planting a seed. It takes some time to convince people, and luckily we still have a bit of time. It seems to be a very strong political pressure on politicians not to stick out their heads, unfortunately, but we see more and more politicians to do so. And what I also see is, I can tell you that behind the scenes they are gathering together. We are helping them to get together to develop political action plans in order to better inform the public and to put pressure on their specific governments. This is now growing behind the scenes, and I have the highest respect for those politicians who wants to build first a growing power that would then, in a couple of months, then grow and come into the surface. Onto the surface. I can tell you that in every country that I have visited, the number of MPs, members of parliament, is growing and the interest is growing. So it's truly like planting a seed that needs some time to grow, and things are moving, definitely. Yes.
Thank you. That's a great news.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And thank you for your efforts, you know. I know that
I'm just one, of many who does that, and I have happened the luck to be one of the first to be called from the Parliament, but there are others. And bear in mind, right before, during, and right after the World Health Assembly's assembly in Geneva in May, there will be many manifestations and political campaigns, and there you will see how big it has come, also how well connected the international groups of lawyers, of human rights activists have now established their cooperation. So this will become more and more visible, and we have then 10 months time after 1st of June in order to have our governments issue this letter of rejection letter. Yeah.
Thank you. I think Robert is going to ask you something.
Yes. Yes. As we know, EU Parliament elections are just around the corner.
Yep.
Yeah. How do we choose the right candidates? Can we expect in EU Parliament in future more parliamentarians that will speak up on this EU nonsense? Will we get more sensible people? How do you see it through Europe? Because you're traveling a lot and you meet with a lot of people.
Yes. Well, first I must say I'm from Switzerland, a Swiss lawyer. Switzerland is not in the EU, but we are heavily influenced by the political actions that are decided in Brussels and in Strasbourg. And as you mentioned, I am also involved almost like a diplomatic mission and consulted with and from European members of Parliament. And the interest is growing. There are new members of European Parliament presenting themselves to vote. From Italy, it will be Renate Holzheisen. I hope so. I have no final confirmation, but it looks to me that she is going to this direction. We have from Austria a small group. that present themselves with the clear purpose to stop the pandemic treaties. Maria Hubner-Mock, then is a small group around her, then also from the FPÖ from Austria. And so from every country, you will see candidates who present themselves with a clear mission statement: we will stop these new pandemic treaties. And I can only wish that people put their vote behind those brave politicians. Often they are not even politicians. They have totally changed their lives to bring this mission to Brussels, because the decisions are taken there. And we see that this is just a farce. This parliament is not an example of true democracy at all. So we need to increase the pressure with all the instruments we have. And personally, I think it's better to try to influence in person than just staying aside and doing nothing. So identify your politicians from your country that have been clearly positioned themselves against WHO's new pandemic treaty and the amendments of the international health regulations.
Yes, the future is today in very fog. If we saw 3 years of intense change in structure of society, that's all behind us. The problems and the new legislative loops that infringe on fundamental freedoms are increasingly complex and hidden. The media is under control. Censorship is in all-time high because nobody's reporting on nothing. And people are somehow losing their focus or motivation. We would gladly like to hear how to set up the struggle or resistance, how to fight back, because people are wondering what are the right steps, because they wander from one subject to another subject, and not all the struggle they are investing in this fight back makes sense. So where do you see solutions? How should people organize? What should they do to have more effects on politicians?
Yes, my first advice would be just put one foot in front of the other, one step after the other, and start with the most obvious and most mature problem. And yes, I am aware that there are many other problems. We don't name them now, but we should start with the most obvious, with the most mature one. And now after 4 years of evidence we gathered from COVID-19, that it was not a brutal Spanish flu type of devastating pandemic to the entire world. It was not. That's a lie. It's a total lie. It was a flu, yes, but it was not life-threatening to the majority of the people. So it were the measures that were harmful. All of that is on the table, and on the table are these new treaties. So my first advice would be focus on that topic, gather as many people as possible behind that, because this is the entrance door and the key to all the other problems as well that are all related with the United Nations and with the World Economic Forum, CBDC, closely connected to the digital health pass, of course. So the digital currency that shall be introduced. Yes, I agree, it's totally interconnected. My first advice would be, let's start with confronting the WHO problem and forcing the public debate on that topic, forcing the public to look at this problem. Because what I have seen so far, everybody who has seen just what we have now discussed with her own eyes, independent whether vaccinated, non-vaccinated, a follower of the state government's recommendations, yes or not, everybody so far was saying, oh, wow, is it so bad? We don't want that, never ever. So let's start with these two agreements, bring it to the public's attention, bring the evidence, that this is truly in these two agreements, and then do it step by step, one after the other. I can tell you the seeds are growing that we have planted. So try to inform your friends, your family members. Try to establish a public debate and put some pressure on your politicians. They are the ones who are the safeguards of your constitutions. They shall also protect your health. How can your health be protected if just 1, 2, 3 people are allowed to make their decision binding for you? So this is easy to understand and easy to resist. We just need to increase the public understanding. And with public understanding comes public pressure. And we work together all over the world. It is amazing to see that. I don't get any money for that, just if you hear me like that. It is a huge sacrifice for me, for my finances. I have 2 children. They don't see me almost never in the past 3, 4 years. I do that because I want to protect my children for the future. I do that in public. I stand as a witness at disposal to every television station if they would call, to every newspaper if they would call. I stay at disposal as a witness because I don't want to have this future for my children. And please try to involve yourself wherever you can, with as little as it is. That will make the difference.
Yes, very brave words from very brave hearts. Thank you for those words. For the end, is there any message that you would like to bring to our Slovene people? What would you say? You said a lot, but for final words.
The final words are very simple. Our right of self-determination and human dignity is the same for every person all over the world, and it does not depend on any government to grant it and on any constitution to have it formalized. You have that. It is given to you from God since you are on this planet. So your right of self-determination and also self-dignity is something that is your right, and it belongs to you and to your children. Stand up and defend it. These are the times where we must do so. And I can tell you there are so many brothers and sisters on this planet that together we are stronger than all of these globalists and global anarchists and power abuses. And it will be a pleasure to defend ourselves.
Very sovereign words from very sovereign person. Tjasa, would you add anything to that? Microphone.
I would just like to thank you really for your efforts. I know how much sacrifice this is for your family, and I would like to thank you that you devote so much time to our cause, for all your commitment and for all your support. And may your work bear very rich fruits.
Thank you, Joshua. May our joint work bring the fruits jointly together, and every contribution has the same great value. This is so important. Thank you so much, Joshua and Robert, for making this interview possible and for your efforts as well. They will bring hope to so many people. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Philip.
Thank you for your time. We are thanking the audience for time you're invested in listening to this interview. Spread this interview between your people, your friends, your family, and we hope to see you soon in another interesting happening or interview. Thank you.
Thank you very much, also from my side.